Hello, welcome to the video on subjunctive forms. You'll note that this video is only for the forms of the subjunctive in Latin, not the use of them. There's many uses of the subjunctive in various contexts, so this video will discuss forms. It's also important to remember that most of these have an active and a passive. I'm not going to go through examples of every single thing. So you have to keep in mind the patterns, and you can look up on the supplementary materials that I post the forms outside of what I do in each slide. I'm trying to make this video rather brief so that you can watch the whole thing in less than, let's say, 15 minutes or 20 minutes. So make sure to kind of latch on to the process in each of the slides, not necessarily every individual form. You can check those elsewhere in the supplementary materials. So let's get started. We'll start with the present tense. It seems to make the most sense to do that. And you'll note that there's going to be a vowel shift, not necessarily an ending change. In fact, the endings, except the first singular, will remain the same. And so we're thinking about the vowels that come after the root but before the ending. And so what we're going to have is a difference per conjugation, because as you know, in the indicative, the conjugation, remember these are like your AREs will have an A vowel, your long EREs will have an E vowel before the ending, and then you got the O4ISU. That's, you know, the basic way to do these things. But in the subjunctive, you're going to have a much different situation. You're going to be changing those vowels to other ones. And so let's use the example amat, which is an indicative verb. It means he, she, or it loves. And this is in the indicative form. Okay. The subjunctive is amet. So you notice how we changed the A to an E. Because we had an A in the indicative, we changed it to an E in the subjunctive. Which means that if we have an E or an I typically, we're going to be changing it to an A. So amo is a first conjugation verb, and therefore the A turned into an E. But let's say we have a second conjugation verb. And just for fun, I'll put this one in the passive. So let's say we have habetur. It is held, it is considered. This is in the indicative. In the subjunctive, you notice we're adding an A. Habeatur. So the extra A is the subjunctive form. And you'll notice that we retain the E. That's because the E is long. But if we decide in the third declension not to retain the E because it's short, so you'll get, let's say, regit. Sorry, my stylus is not cooperating. Regit is in the indicative. That's going to turn into, in the subjunctive, regat. You'll notice the I turned into an A. That is simply because the E in regere, which is in the third, is a short E, and therefore it doesn't hang on for dear life when you add that vowel. So the long E over here in habetur was retained because it's a long E, habere. But regere, which is a short E in the infinitive, it goes away completely. So the short sounding I doesn't get retained, and you replace it completely with an A ending. You'll notice across the endings keep staying the same. That is because in the present tense, those endings are going to largely be the same with the exception of that first singular O ending. All right, so the last bit that you really need to talk about here is fourth and what's called third IO. Third IO, we've been over maybe a couple times briefly, but that's verbs like facio. Use those first two principal parts. And the only difference here is that instead of, we'll use the first plural in this one. So we were used to facimus, right? We make. Now we are going to have faciamus. And I guess the difference is between rego and facio is that this I is a thing, and it retains itself in the subjunctive form. So it's faciamus with the IA instead of just an A. The same thing happens in the fourth. So if you have scire, you have the difference between skimus and skiamus. Skimus being the indicative, skiamus with retaining the IA. And the I hangs on because it's a fourth. It's got that I there. So you have third IO right here. You have fourth. They both hang on to their I, but they still add the A. And what I want to do is point out, to end the slide here, this nice little way to remember all of this, if we remember our conjugation numbers. In first conjugation, the subjunctive has an E, so we. Notice I capitalized the vowels in each word. In second conjugation, you get an EA, just like, remember, habere was habetur turned into habeatur. And then in the third, with no IO, that's like rego, regere, you get A for all. It just turns into an A. And you have third IO for giant, notice the IA, and then liars, which is fourth. And so you can remember which vowels to use with we beat all giant liars in that order. Okay, so first, second, third IO, fourth. We beat all giant liars. Those are the vowels for the subjunctive in the present tense. And you'll note one more time that those are just the vowels. You can add passive or active endings onto those. Let's move on to the imperfect, which are a little bit easier. And here we're going to work with imperfect subjunctives. You'll note that the present tense had the same kind of process, just with a different vowel. This is actually going to have a different structure altogether, because you're expecting in the indicative, remember the ba, right? You're going to be like, all right, so we have, let's pick rego again. Regebas, you were ruling. That is the indicative. It's not going to have a BA, the imperfect subjunctive, but it will have a pretty easy form. So it's different, but it's still pretty simple. So what we're going to do for the imperfect subjunctive is you're going to have your infinitive. We'll use regere, any infinitive, amare, habere, whatever you want. As long as it's that present active infinitive. And then you're just simply, this is the easiest part, just going to add an ending. Whoop! There it is. Regeres. Yeah, that was it. All right, so let's just do it like, hey, let's make it passive in third person. Why not? So we see regere. How about regeretur? Done. Passive and third person now. That's all you do. It's the infinitive plus the ending. The conjugations don't really distinguish. You just kind of use the same infinitive. So, sorry, I didn't change colors. So there's amare. This looks like the infinitive. It's beautiful. Let's just throw a T in there. Amaret. Boom. Now you have the imperfect subjunctive. It's the infinitive. You add one of the active or passive endings depending on what you want. It's great. This is actually the actual rule. It's not just a trick to remember. So, think of an irregular verb like posse, which would be the infinitive of possum, to be able. You can add things onto that too. So possemus, we were able. Done. So it's just the infinitive plus the ending. That's the process. It's kind of cool like that. All right, and think of an irregular subjunctive like fere. That's one more example. You're like, okay, that's kind of weird. It's an odd one. It's irregular. It's got two R's. That's fine, and let's throw a passive ending on it just for equity's sake, and we'll put an NTUR, okay? Ferentur, very nice. Imperfect subjunctive. So just remember, imperfect subjunctive is that present active infinitive plus the ending. This even applies to deponents. So the only real point I want to make here, beyond the easy infinitive plus ending thing, is that for deponents, you're going to have an interesting thing happen. So let's use sequor. You'll note that the dictionary entry goes like this: sequor, sequi, secutus. Here's your infinitive, okay, but that's a passive infinitive in form because it's a deponent verb. So what you need to do is you have to note what conjugation you're in. So you're like, all right, this is third because the I ending is the passive infinitive of the third conjugation. And so you have to invent an infinitive that doesn't actually exist. So we're going to pretend there's an infinitive sequere. Then you're going to add, and this I can't stress enough, only passive endings because deponents always have passives. And so you have to invent the active infinitive, but then you have to add a passive ending on it, okay? So you don't use the present active infinitive of the deponent as it appears. You have to actually invent the one it would have if it weren't deponent. So you see the sequere. You'll never see sequere as an infinitive form, but you have to assume it for your imperfect subjunctive based on the conjugation number that the verb is. I can do one more example of this before we move on to the next slide, but this might be helpful to rewind and rewatch if you're confused at this point. I'll use a non-third example just to make sure that we understand. So we'll use hortor, hortari, hortatus. So here we have hortari, that's our infinitive, it's a deponent, it's passive in form, and we have to invent an active form that doesn't exist before we add a passive ending. Note, it's still, like, deponent is going to take that passive ending. This makes it okay, right here, that ending. But you have to invent that form there. Hortaremur. We were urging. All right, so remember, for imperfect subjunctive, infinitive plus ending. That's the biggie. The present active infinitive plus the ending. We'll expand on that rule a little bit, but that's going to be a big one for the imperfect subjunctive. It's different, but it's actually quite easy. And with the imperfect having been taught, it's a good time to do sum esse fui in the subjunctive with the present and imperfect forms as well. These ones, because we're dealing with one verb, I will just simply draw a chart. It is not that slow to do, so I'm going to just insert these. You'll notice instead of sum s est, you're going sim sis sit. There's a lot of si's. Now here's one that's interesting because I've told you that the Romans did not like this sound. It is true they did not, but welcome to subjunctives where the int occurs. It's so bad. Sim sis sit, simositus sint. Oof, I just quiver at that last form, sint. And so, yeah, those are a thing. And those are actually more important, probably for, we're going to use, in a couple slides, we're going to use those in a different way. But knowing those forms will help you not just with forms of to be, but with all other verbs in the perfect passive. That's my hint to you of where that's going to go. And so the imperfect subjunctive actually is not, the imperfect subjunctive for sum esse is nice because it follows the same rule as the other imperfect subjunctives. You grab your infinitive, and then you add endings. M, S, T, there we go, mus, tis, nt. So notice, we just took the infinitive, esse, you plugged it in and added MST most sunt. That's it. That's all it is. That's the imperfect of to be. So this one requires a bit more focus and trying to remember something new. The imperfect, you just applied the concept that you just learned for the imperfect subjunctive, so that one actually, while it's a new form, is not hard because it follows the same rules as the other verbs. And that brings us to the perfect and pluperfect active as we move across our principal parts. The first and second principal part are, of course, with the future, or the present and the imperfect. And so we move to the third principal part, which is the perfect and the pluperfect active, and we'll be doing the subjunctive. The cool thing about these is that all verbs work the same way in this regard because, as you know, your perfect and pluperfect do not really vary by conjugation. They are simply just using that third principal part, which usually has an I ending and a non-deponent verb, and usually you do the same thing regardless of the conjugation number. So here we are with a universal. This is how you do all perfect and pluperfect active subjunctives. So over here in the perfect, let's use an example of rego again. Why not? So we'll write out our principal parts. Rego, regere. I'm going to go ahead and just keep going over the line. I apologize. All right, rexi, rectus. So we're going to grab this third principal part, rexi, and we're going to remember that our root is rex. All right, so we chop the I. Whoosh. We put an eri. That's the key for the subjunctive here. And then your endings that you already know, MST, mostus, und. So rexerim, rexeris, rexerit, rexerimus, rexeritis, rexerint. Ooh, yes, that's right, it's int again. Oh, it's so awful sounding, but it's true. All right, and so let's just get rid of, that is a true form, the third plural, but let's just, for the sake of our sanity, so we don't have to hear int, we'll put imus. All right, so we have ruled rexerimus. You'll notice you'll still be able to tell it's perfect because of the root, then the eri, then the ending. So those are your parts. Yes, und is gone. Hello, int. I apologize yet again for that. You can apply this to any verb. I just used rego for fun. I'm actually going to use rego again because it's already up there, and I'm trying not to make this video for too long. So here's the process yet again. I'll do this one in green. Why not? Pluperfect is going to be green. All right. So you still chop the I off. All right. You have rex. All right. And this time, the pluperfect actually works a lot like the imperfect. The problem is you don't have a present infinitive to use. You use the perfect infinitive. It's actually the same process, but with the perfect infinitive. The perfect active infinitive is, of course, rexisse, and then you add MST mostus und, and so the equivalent form in the pluperfect across is rexissemus. You'll notice you still have your root, the active perfective root. You have your isse there. That makes your perfect active infinitive, and then your ending mus. So you have your three parts, root, perfect active infinitive, isse, and then mus. This is actually quite easy, just like the imperfect subjunctive. You just use a different infinitive and a different stem. Okay, so I always remember the pluperfect as the same process as imperfect, just different root and different form of the infinitive. So we're actually almost done. We're getting to the perfect and pluperfect passive in the next slide, which also includes all of your deponent forms as they exist. So some of you might be thinking about what the indicative looks like in the perfect and pluperfect passive as we enter this slide, and that is, remember, the fourth principal part plus the verb to be. This is where you get something like, I'll do it up here, matus est. He was loved. He has been loved. Last principal part, the fourth principal part, verb to be. It's no different in the subjunctive, and that's kind of cool because you don't have to memorize a new process, but if you remember from a couple slides ago, you had new forms of to be. So let's come back over here. Perfect passive uses, so uses the present of to be. So what we're going to do is we're going to use amo, amare. We'll use our principal parts here. Amo, amare. a Maui. Having trouble with my stylus. Oops, that's just wrong. Amatus. All right. So over here, we're going to grab our amatus. So let's make it feminine. Why not? Amata. Maybe this will be just Cleopatra. Amata. And then we're going to add in a present to be, but we need the subjunctive of to be this time. And so our new form is amata sit. So this is going to be sim, sis, sit, simus, sit, sint. You'll notice same process as the indicative. Same process, but that verb to be, that thing is the subjunctive this time. All right, so the perfect and pluperfect passive subjunctive are simply the same processes, just with a different form of to be, which is actually kind of neat because it makes it easier to do, I think. So remember our pluperfect subjunctive would be something like amata erat, right? Because eram, eras, erat, eramus, eratus, erant are the imperfects of to be. So we need to use the imperfect of to be in the subjunctive. And in the previous slide we did that, so we're thinking amata, maybe it's Cleopatra again, I don't know. Infinitive plus ending, and boom, you have yourself a pluperfect subjunctive form in the perfect passive. Let's do a deponent verb just for fun, just to make sure we still remember that they exist. So just give me a second while I erase everything here. Remember, you can always rewind if I went too fast and rewatch it a couple times, and make sure you can email me questions if you have them, or log on to office hours or something, or if you watch this video in years where you don't have the coronavirus problem, perhaps you can come see me during office hours or after school or whatever. All right, so let's do loquor. We haven't talked about loquor today. Loqui, locutus, and all of a sudden my stylus likes working, which is good news. All right, so these are now going to turn into the perfect and pluperfect deponent subjunctives. You'll note there's no third principal parts. We've already kind of covered this in the deponent stuff in Latin too, and so we're going to use this last guy here. It's the same process. So I'll deal with maybe the how about the first singular this time? And since I'm a guy, I'm going to put us. Locutus sim would be how you say I spoke, I chatted, and yeah, that's really it. That's just that last principal part. Throw your subjunctive of to be in there, and it's good to go. The pluperfect with the same form, the equivalent form, locutus sm. Locutus sm. And before we go on this slide, there's one cool thing that authors like to do. They like to really emphasize how past tense it is. So sometimes you'll get, instead of sm, they'll put, instead of the imperfect subjunctive form, they'll put like the pluperfect subjunctive form. You'll get fuisem, which you'll note fui is the third principal part of to be. With the ise, you're actually just kind of creating a situation where you already know it's pluperfect, but like the author wanted to really make sure that you knew it was pluperfect by putting that that perfective form of to be in there. So locutus fuisem, I had spoken, like way, make sure that it was like a very completed action in the past. Anyway, that is the cool stuff going on there. Make sure to rewind if you have issues. And finally, the last slide, you'll have to ask yourself, where's the future? We've done present, imperfect, perfect, pluperfect, active, and passive. Where's the future? Well, it turns out there is no future subjunctive. If you think about like the future, and I know we haven't really talked about what the subjunctive does too much quite yet, but the subjunctive is kind of a non-factual thing. It's either like a hope, or like perhaps it's some kind of cause effect or a purpose, or there are just some contrived things that are happening, or perhaps it's more of an indirect idea. And the future has a little bit of that into it as already, because it's hard to speak factually about the future. given that it hasn't happened yet. We don't actually know if something has happened or will happen. And so the idea is it would be a redundant form. The future already has a bit of uncertainty to it, or a little bit of non-factual idea to it. So there is no future subjunctive. There doesn't need to be. Oftentimes, when you expect a future, you might get the present subjunctive, so keep that in mind. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope this helped a bit, and I hope that you can use the supplementary materials on the site as well to fill in any gaps. And do make sure to contact me if you have any issues. Thank you.